Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. And in this particular video, I want to talk about what is a college professor's schedule, particularly in a business school, and how much time you should spend teaching versus doing research. So, if you don't know, I'm actually a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. And I'm just trying to give as freely as I possibly can to help out other people. You might notice that my surrounding is a little bit different. So I'm on vacation in Port Stanley, Ontario. You can look it up. It's a gorgeous little cute town. But I wanted to get this video out because somebody had asked about what schedule they should be doing or thinking about with doing teaching versus consulting versus doing research. And the first thing that you should sort of focus on if you are going in and thinking becoming a college professor and you're thinking of getting a PhD or doing research or something like that, the vast majority of your time as a business school professor should always be thinking about doing research. And if you talk to any business school professor, that's the thing that they're going to get most excited about. And that's the thing that generally you get paid for. It's also the thing that helps you to move from place to place to place, because once you write publications, it allows you, or it gives you sort of currency in the marketplace to move from different location to different location. So they're going to be most excited and most energized, and most people are going to mention that research is the most important thing, right? So teaching and consulting and all that kind of other stuff is very secondary, unfortunately, although teaching is still incredibly important depending on what the courses are and what's actually going. But in general, the focus is going to be on research as a college professor. Particularly in a business school, it might change from different institutions to different institutions. Now, there is a lot to think about with this, and I wanted to sort of talk about some of the caveats and to think about this in different ways, right? So generally when you start out as a assistant professor, so if you don't know this, there is, and I didn't know this, don't feel bad, I didn't know this when I first started out either. It took me a few years to figure this out, and you just kind of absorb it, and that's really what all of this kind of stuff is: accelerate your own journey in getting a PhD or a DBA in business. So there is what's called an assistant professor, and this is an untenured professor at a business school or at any university. And then you will go, and it's called different things in different countries. So this is very much the North American system. So if you go to, in Europe, they'll have a different system. I believe it's called a lecturer as at that stage, and New Zealand, I think, has that as well. Although the schools, and most schools, so that's the other thing to point out, is most schools around the world are moving towards the American system. It's just a general trend that's happening. So they're all going towards assistant and then associate professor, something that you get once you get tenure, you get promotion and tenure. And that's where everybody votes around. All the tenured professors vote around a vote around a table, and they say whether they want to keep you on faculty. If not, then you have to go find another position. You either get an associate professor position someplace else that has different standards, or see you in a different light or whatever, or you become an assistant professor again at another institution. And then after a certain number of years of making more publications, then you become a full professor. So that's the thing to think about. And once you become an assistant to associate, that's the tenure process. That's when you get tenure. So the vast majority of assistant professors' time is almost always on research, right? So you're talking 80% of your time is going to be on research in general, and that's including teaching and things like that. You should be always focused on doing research. That's at a research school, or thinking about doing, at a, all of the schools that you've heard about generally, if you're around the world, they're all research schools. And those ones are going to expect an assistant professor to spend about 80% of their time doing research. And then as you get more senior, right, so you become a tenured professor, for example, associate professor, um, Some professors, not that many, some professors, I should take that back. A significant number, but it's still, there's more people going the traditional route, which is doing research. Some professors will do like executive teaching and consulting and things like that, which are not, they're not really, they're on the side. They're really not the emphasis of anything. So and maybe once you're very senior and you're thinking about retirement, then people will do a lot more consulting and things like executive teaching. But for the vast majority of people, executive teaching and consulting are not really sort of priorities for most people doing sort of a business school professor or any professor. To be honest, they are, maybe it's something that you do for a week or two here and there, you know, every year if you're doing the consulting thing, or you might do executive teaching for, you know, maybe a couple of weekends a year, that kind of stuff, right? Like it's a really sort of minor emphasis of your time. And then there is also something that you should also think about too is people have different trajectories in what they want to do and they want to go to different places, right? So that's a really important thing. And so there's a blend of schools. There's all sorts of different kinds of schools that you can get into. Some of them are more teaching focused, which is going to get you to teach a lot of courses, and then some of them are going to be a lot more research focused, right? So they're going to be teaching less courses, and they're going to be maybe teaching more doctoral students or interacting with doctoral students. That's a really important thing to think about, and depending on what kind of institution you go to and which one you prefer, in the long run, you know, that those allow you, or those are going to give you different sort of priorities in what you want to do with your life, right? So teaching, you're going to be teaching a heck of a lot more. Research, you're going to be doing a lot more research and interacting with graduate students, becoming their, you know, your advisors, PhD advisors. You're going to be, um, you know, just things like that, right? So it just depends on what you're doing. And the thing that to be well aware about is that generally the research gives you currency to move from institution to institution. So that's the only thing, that the reason why people emphasize that early on as assistant professor. So you don't go to one place and then that's where you stay. You can move to different institutions going forward, right? So that's an important thing. Um, and the last thing I wanted to point out in sort of figuring out your normal college professor schedule is thinking about, you know, the service activities, for example, that the university has. So when you're an assistant professor untenured, then your service activities are generally pretty small. They're going to be fairly easy. And then as you move up and to become a full professor, you take on a lot more responsibility and you're on many more committees at the university level. As well as at the college level, you're doing a ton of meetings. You're involved in a lot of committees, and that's normal, right? So there's generally what the priorities are, right? That they change throughout your career. That's an important thing to think about. It's generally much more research focused at the beginning of your career. Then it changes as you sort of move through your career. And hopefully the goal is that you've worked on sort of building tricks and tips and all that kind of stuff that you can actually be research productive while you do those other things. And a lot of people are. Um, but then, you know, some people just focus solely on administrative work and things like that, which is totally fine. That's the key thing to think about going forward, is which do you want to do, and sort of prioritizing your tasks to get to those particular those ends, right? So understanding the means that you want to do to get to those particular ends. None is sort of better than the other. They just have different career trajectories and, you know, maybe different income levels, depending on what you're looking into, and different, you know, ways to interact. And they all serve valuable purposes, and they're all equally valued. They're just different sort of trajectories and what happens going forward. So those are important things to think about, is that it changes throughout your career. Generally, consulting, executive teaching, not really all that emphasized, although people do them, but they are not necessarily all that emphasized in general. And the other thing to think about is that, you know, it's really your choice in what you want to do going forward. And that's a really cool thing with becoming a professor and sort of getting your doctorate of any sort, is that it's choose your own adventure. It's very entrepreneurial, that you can go and do whatever you want, and you are choosing that career. And that's the important thing. And it took me a long time to figure that out in my mind of what that means. And but once you get that, you sort of understand, that you're in control of everything, and you can sort of move the dial in one way or the other. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully that answered your questions. And do give me a thumbs up if you appreciate this video, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right, take care. Bye.